Have you ever heard of the legend of the Dogman? A creature, half man and half wolf, stalking the shadows of America's deepest forests. We usually dismiss these tales as ghost stories meant to scare children, right? But today, I'm going to tell you a story, a true story, one that made me never look at the forest the same way again. One Halloween night, my 3 friends and I entered the Michigan woods, and only I came out. But survival wasn't the scariest part. The real horror was what I brought back with me, the curse of the Dogman. I want to warn you, if you ever hear a howl in the night or spot a pair of glowing yellow eyes staring at you from the darkness, run. But don't feel safe just because you make it through the night, because Dogman never forgets, and it will find you when you're at your weakest. I thought this would be just an ordinary weekend camping trip. The idea, of course, came from Tom. It always did. He was into weird stuff like that. The Michigan forest had been off limits for years due to some mysterious disappearances. But Tom saw it as a challenge. Just some nonsense to scare off cowards, he told us with his usual grin. I had no idea we were walking straight into a nightmare. Rachel, Emily, and I came along. We've been close friends since high school, and this trip was supposed to be a chance to hang out, light a campfire, tell spooky stories, and leave the real world behind. But as soon as we entered that forest, something felt off. The wind stopped blowing. There were no bird songs. The trees stood still like statues cloaked in darkness. And the silence was so heavy that it made my scalp tingle. I forced a laugh, telling myself I was just overthinking it. But deep down, something uneasy had already begun to stir, like the forest had been waiting for us all along. We found a clearing big enough to set up camp just as the sun began to set. The canopy overhead blocked out most of the day's remaining light, leaving behind a dull, washed-out orange glow in the sky. Tom quickly set up the tents, oblivious to the tension creeping into the air between us. Rachel clung to my hand, her eyes scanning the woods, as if searching for something. "Do you feel anything strange?" she asked, her voice so soft I almost missed it. "It's just the forest," I replied, but even I didn't believe my own words. As night fell, we sat around the campfire, pretending everything was fine by telling the same old ghost stories we'd heard a dozen times. But the atmosphere felt heavy. The fire flickered, casting just enough light to illuminate our faces, while the darkness beyond was dense and suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the shadows. Every time I looked around, though, all I saw were motionless trees. Then Emily started telling a story, one we hadn't heard before. "The Dogman isn't like a werewolf," she said, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "It doesn't wait for a full moon. It doesn't transform. It's always there, something caught between human and beast. It lives deep in the shadows of the forest, in places no one dares to go. And once it sets its eyes on you, it never lets go." Tom gave a nervous chuckle, but I could tell he wasn't as carefree as he wanted to seem. Rachel's grip tightened around my hand. "And Emily?" She wasn't smiling at all. "People say," Emily continued, "if you hear it howl, you must never respond. Don't look into the darkness. Don't run. It will chase you. And once it marks you, it'll come back over and over again until you're too tired to run anymore." Her words left a chill in the air, and right then, the wind picked up, sharp and cold, piercing through my jacket like invisible fingers. And that's when we heard it. A howl. It echoed from deep within the forest, drawn out and eerie, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't anything familiar. Every hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and Rachel's nails dug painfully into my skin. "Just wolves," Tom muttered, but his voice wavered. I stood, grabbed a flashlight, and aimed it into the darkness. Nothing, but I knew something was out there, watching us. Then I saw them, two glowing, yellow eyes in the distance, flickering at the edge of the forest. They were only visible for a second, but it was enough. I tried to say something, but the words caught in my throat. My heart pounded violently in my chest. Rachel clutched my arm tighter, and Tom forced a grin, though I could see the fear creeping into his eyes. Emily, however, just stared into the darkness, her expression unreadable. "We need to leave," Rachel whispered urgently. Tom shook his head. "We just got here." "You don't understand." Rachel's voice trembled. "We have to go." Before any of us could move, we heard a scratching sound behind the tents, long and deliberate, like claws testing the fabric, seeing how easy it would be to tear it apart. No one moved. The sound came again, closer this time, like it had made up its mind. Tom jumped to his feet, flashlight in hand, and shined it toward the noise. The beam swept across the cold trunks of the trees, and then we saw it, a hulking figure, matted for hanging like damp branches, standing between two trees, staring right at us. Dogman. I don't remember if I was breathing in that moment. All I knew was that it had seen us, and it smiled. I can't explain how a creature like that could smile, but it did. A twisted, mocking grin, as if it was toying with us. Rachel gasped. "We need to run." But before she could finish, the Dogman vanished into the shadows, as swift as a gust of wind. No sound, no trace. Tom let out a weak laugh, trying to mask his fear. "It's just our imagination, right?" And then we heard it, heavy, deliberate footsteps, circling the campsite. The Dogman wasn't gone. It was still out there, lurking in the darkness. And it was waiting. When I woke up the next morning, Tom was gone. At first, I didn't think much of it. He might have gone to relieve himself or decided to explore the woods. But as time passed, he still didn't return. Our tents remained undisturbed. His sleeping bag was still warm, and his flashlight lay untouched beside it. All his gear was right where he left it, as if he had never left at all, but Tom was nowhere to be found. Rachel was the first to sense something was wrong. "Where's Tom?" she asked, her voice trembling. We split up to search, calling his name as we ventured deeper into the forest. Our voices echoed between the dry trees before being swallowed by a suffocating silence. There were no birds, no rustling leaves, just pure, oppressive quiet, like the forest had drained away every sound. And then, we found them. Footprints. They were massive and strange, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Sharp claws dug deep into the soil, and the prints were far too large to belong to any ordinary animal. They circled our campsite and then led off into the dark, dense depths of the forest. Emily collapsed to the ground, hugging her knees, her eyes wide with fear. "It took him," she whispered. Rachel shot to her feet. "What do you mean? What took him? What are you talking about?" Emily didn't respond. She just stared into the darkness where the footprints vanished, her spirit seemingly shattered. It was as if she'd already realized that escape was no longer possible. The second night fell too quickly. Darkness blanketed the forest, thick and suffocating, like someone had pulled a heavy curtain over everything. We huddled around the campfire, silent. No more jokes, no more ghost stories, The fear had become real. As the fire began to dwindle, Rachel turned to me, her eyes red and glassy. "We have to leave. Now! We can't stay here another second." I wanted to agree. I wanted to tear down the tents and run as far as possible. But deep inside, I knew the truth. It was waiting for us to run. "We can't," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "If we run, it will hunt us." Rachel clung to me, and in the dim firelight, I saw the belief in her eyes that we were going to die here. And then it started. The scratching sound returned, slow and deliberate, just outside the tent. It was like a monster testing the fabric, playing with us, savoring the moment. Rachel let out a soft sob and pressed herself closer to me. Emily didn't move. She just sat there, wide-eyed, staring at the bulging tent wall, as if something was slithering around us from the outside. Then came the footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crushing dried leaves underfoot with each step, slow and steady, like the forest itself was announcing our doom. I knew then that it wasn't playing anymore. Rachel whispered, "It's right out there, isn't it?" I didn't answer. I just looked at her, eyes wide with terror, and we both knew it had come. And then Rachel was gone. I didn't see her leave. I didn't hear her scream. There was no sound at all. One moment she was there, and the next, she was gone. The empty tent beside me looked untouched, as if she had never been there. The only trace of her was a torn piece of fabric snagged on a tent peg and a smear of dried blood on the ground. It felt like my soul was being crushed. The fear wrapped around my chest, making it impossible to breathe. Emily sat motionless, her eyes dark and void of emotion. She turned to me and spoke in a low, hollow voice, as if it had been decided long ago. "We're not getting out of here. It's already made its choice." The howl came, long and piercing, echoing from deep within the forest like the mournful cry of a lost soul. It wailed, then faded into the darkness, as if the darkness itself was its voice. In that moment, I knew we had trespassed into a place we never should have entered. Emily stood up, her gaze empty. "If it doesn't take us tonight, it'll take us tomorrow. And if not tomorrow," she looked at me with hopeless eyes, "it will wait." And then, in the stillness, I felt them, eyes watching us from the darkness, bright yellow eyes, flickering from the distant forest, silently observing us. No rush, no urgency. Dogman had seen us, and now it was just waiting for the moment we would be at our weakest. We had no choice but to run. Rachel had vanished right in front of me, and if we stayed still, the same thing would happen to Emily and me. There was no time to talk or think. We bolted into the forest, surrounded by fog and darkness closing in from every direction. The darkness here wasn't natural. It didn't just block our vision, it seemed to devour the light from our flashlights. The towering, barren trees stood like silent ghosts, watching as we sprinted past. The wind whistled through the branches, accompanied by the dry rustle of leaves. But I knew it wasn't just the wind. Something was chasing us. The heavy, rapid sound of footsteps echoed behind us, moving through the underbrush with terrifying ease. It was as if the forest was its domain, and we were nothing more than foolish trespassers. Emily panted beside me, her eyes wide with pure terror. She clung tightly to my hand, as if letting go would mean being dragged into the darkness forever. "We won't make it," she whispered, her voice breaking like a desperate, suppressed cry. "It's going to get us. It's playing with us." We stumbled onto a narrow path, but I had no idea where it led. Everything looked the same: twisted trees, thick fog, and shadows pressing in on every side. No matter how far we ran, it felt like we were trapped in a loop. Dogman wasn't just hunting us, it controlled the forest itself. My mind began to unravel. I swore I could hear Rachel's voice, her familiar laughter, but distorted somehow, as if it wasn't really her. It mingled with the snapping of branches underfoot, and I knew Dogman wasn't just after my body, it was tearing at my sanity too. We stumbled into a clearing, where the cold moonlight poured down, but its pale glow gave me no comfort. Emily came to a halt, her legs trembling. "We have to hide," she said, her voice desperate. "If we don't, it'll take us." But there was nowhere left to hide. And that's when I saw it. At the edge of the clearing stood Dogman, towering and monstrous. Its fur was black as night, blending into the darkness around it, and its glowing yellow eyes shone in the moonlight. It tilted its head, as if deciding whether we were still worth chasing. Emily whimpered and backed away. "Run," she whispered. "Run now." I wanted to, but my legs wouldn't move. Dogman's gaze locked onto me, and in those eyes, I saw no animal instinct, only cold, calculating intelligence. It had played this game many times before. Emily yanked on my arm, and we sprinted back into the woods. But this time, I knew there was no hope. Behind us, Dogman's footsteps were steady and deliberate. It didn't need to rush. It knew we would tire before it did. The darkness thickened, as if even the moon had abandoned us. Every time I glanced back, I saw those glowing eyes, always closer, always watching. "Jared," Emily's voice cracked with exhaustion. I can't run anymore." And then, she fell. I turned back to pull her up, but Dogman was already there. Its shadow burst through the fog, and before I could react, Emily was gone. There was no scream, no blood. She simply vanished into the darkness, as if she had never existed. I stood there, panting, every muscle in my body burning. I had nowhere left to run. Dogman had taken all of my friends. Now, it was just me. The hulking shadow emerged from behind the trees, immense and terrifying. Dogman stepped toward me slowly, with an air of triumph. It had already won. I was nothing more than prey, exhausted and ready for the final blow. But it didn't strike. Instead, it stared into my eyes. That gaze was deep and haunting, like a brand being seared into my soul, a mark that would never fade. Dogman didn't need to kill me. It wanted me to live with the fear, to live with the memory of my friends lost to the darkness, to live knowing it could return anytime it wanted. And then, Dogman turned away and disappeared into the mist, vanishing into the shadows. I stood alone, trembling, as a chilling truth pierced through my mind. Dogman never forgets. It will wait until I am at my weakest. I don't remember how long I kept running after Emily vanished. All I knew was that my legs were numb, and my lungs burned, each breath feeling like a punch to my chest. The thick darkness surrounded me like a living creature. It wasn't just outside. It crept into my mind. Every path I took led me back to the same place, as if the forest itself was toying with me. No matter how far I ran, every step only brought me back to where I started. When I found the cabin, I couldn't tell if it was luck or a curse. The structure stood alone in the forest, old and crumbling, as if abandoned for decades. My heart pounded against my ribs, screaming at me not to enter. But I knew Dogman was out there. hidden in the shadows, waiting. I had no other choice. The wooden door creaked loudly as I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air inside was damp and rancid. The stench of rot and decay hit me like a wave, making me gag. My flashlight flickered weakly, but it cast just enough light for me to see what awaited me. Skeletons. Scattered across the floor were human remains, skulls rolled among piles of rotting leaves, and some bones still had decayed flesh clinging to them. Deep claw marks scarred the bones, etched as a gruesome reminder of what had happened here. In the corner of the room, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. Old photographs. They were pinned to the walls with rusted nails, pictures of others who had come here before us. They had once been carefree, smiling campers, much like we had been. Now, every one of them was gone. I stepped closer, my heart sinking as I looked at the last photo. It was of us, Rachel, Tom, Emily, and me. We stood around the campfire, laughing. But something was horribly wrong. The photo wasn't taken by any of us. It had been taken from the darkness, as if Dogman had been there all along, watching us from the beginning. Footsteps sounded outside. I jolted, and the flashlight slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor with a dull thud. The light wobbled wildly across the rotting wooden walls, casting twisted shadows that writhed like the spirits of the dead. I bent down to grab the flashlight, and that's when I heard it scratching at the door. Slow, deliberate. It had found me. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat like the toll of a funeral bell. I knew I didn't have much time. Dogman didn't need to break down the door. It knew I had nowhere to run. It wanted me to feel every moment of hopelessness. I swept the flashlight around the room, desperate for an escape. But there were no windows, just decaying walls that seemed to trap every soul unlucky enough to enter. This place wasn't built to shelter. It was built to imprison. Then, the scratching stopped. Silence fell over the cabin, heavy and suffocating. I stood frozen, every muscle tensed, straining to catch the faintest sound. But something was wrong with the silence. It was the kind that came right before something terrible happened. A moment of stillness before the storm. And then, the door burst open. I didn't even see it move. Dogman was inside in an instant, and the air grew thick with the weight of its presence before I could scream. It towered over me, larger than any creature I'd ever seen. Its black fur hung in damp clumps, and its glowing yellow eyes burned like the fires of hell. This wasn't just an animal. It was a nightmare given form. It stared at me, those deep, intelligent eyes filled with malice and cruel intent, as if it had waited its whole life for this moment. I was nothing more than exhausted prey, and it knew it, but it didn't attack. Instead, Dogman tilted its head, just like a dog might when sizing up its master. And then, it smiled, a twisted, hideous grin stretched across its face, revealing razor-sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. In that moment, I understood. Dogman didn't want to kill me, not yet. It wanted me to live with the fear. It turned away and vanished into the mist, melting back into the shadows. I was left alone, surrounded by bones and haunted by memories. I didn't die that night, but I knew that I'd never truly escape, because Dogman never lets go. I don't remember how I escaped that forest. All I know is that, when I came to, I was kneeling at the forest's edge under a gray morning sky. My face was bruised, and my mind swirled in delirium. Dogman hadn't killed me, and that terrified me more than anything else. Death was less frightening than knowing it had let me live. They found me lying on a trail, filthy and swollen with cuts and bruises. The rescue team, asked me what had happened, but I said nothing. How could I explain? They would never understand. They didn't know that the forest doesn't just swallow bodies, it consumes souls. They searched for days, but they found nothing. No trace of Tom, Rachel, or Emily. No sign of the things I had seen in the cabin. To them, I was just a lucky survivor, a lost hiker who had gone mad in the woods. But I knew the truth. Dogman doesn't let its prey go that easily. In the days that followed, I began hearing noises at night. At first, it was footsteps outside my window, slow, deliberate steps crunching against the ground. I would jump out of bed, yank the curtains open, nothing, but I knew it was there, lurking in the darkness. Then came the scratching, the sound of claws dragging slowly, deliberately, along the window frame, as if to remind me I'm still here. Nights became unbearable. Every time I drifted off, I saw those glowing yellow eyes, in my dreams, burning into my soul, a constant reminder that I would never escape. A month after I returned, I saw it again. This time, not in a dream. It was the dead of night. I woke with a start, feeling the weight of someone, or something, watching me. The familiar yellow eyes stared back at me from the mirror across the room, empty, cruel, and hungry. I leaped from bed, flicked on the light. The mirror was empty, but for one brief moment, I had seen myself in the reflection, and my eyes had been glowing yellow. That's when I knew it had marked me. Dogman hadn't killed me because it wanted me to carry its curse. Day by day, night by night, its darkness burrowed deeper into my mind, tearing apart what little humanity I had left. The footsteps and scratches weren't the worst of it. I started hearing Rachel's laugh, Emily's voice calling out to me, and Tom's faint cries, echoing from deep within the forest. I couldn't tell if they were memories or hallucinations. And every time I looked in the mirror, the yellow eyes stared back at me. Each day, I felt less human. I tried running. I moved away from the town, changed houses, tried to leave it all behind. But there was no escape. There never would be. Dogman never forgets. The full moon returned. I heard its howl in the wind, long and chilling, a reminder that it was time. I knew I didn't have much time left. This time, it wouldn't spare me. I could feel the bloodlust rising within me, creeping through my veins like a black tide, drowning every rational thought. I looked down at my hands. Sharp claws began to grow from my fingertips, ripping through the fragile skin of a human body. Fangs pushed through my gums, and waves of pain shot through my bones, as if something inside me was waking up. Dogman hadn't killed me because it had made me part of it. The truth hit me all at once. No one escapes Dogman. Now I sit here, writing this not to ask for help. No one can help me. I write to warn you. If you hear a howl from deep in the forest, or if you catch a glimpse of yellow eyes staring at you from the darkness, don't look back. Don't stop. Run. Run as far and as fast as you can. But even if you escape that night, remember this: Dogman never forgets. It waits, and it will come back when you're at your weakest. So, what do you think? Do you believe in Dogman? I don't need you to believe, because I know it's real. Those who encounter it either disappear forever or live haunted for the rest of their lives. I'm one of them. I hear its footsteps at night. I see those yellow eyes staring back at me in the mirror, and I know it will return. If you ever hear a strange howl in the dead of night, or if you spot a pair of glowing yellow eyes lurking in the dark, run. Run as fast as you can. But even if you escape that night, remember one thing: Dogman never forgets. It waits. And one day, when you're at your weakest, it will come. If this story sent chills down your spine, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next terrifying tale. And if you've experienced anything like this yourself, leave a comment below. But before you go to bed tonight, make sure you check your windows. Sleep well, if you dare.